Manager for the Gathering for Justice. I'm excited to welcome you here this evening to our third virtual edition of our live Radical Read series. On behalf of everyone at the Gathering for Justice, I want to thank you all so much for joining us. As many of you know, the Gathering for Justice was founded in 2005 by the legendary Harry Belafonte, an artist, an activist, and a civil rights leader, to build a national movement to end child incarceration. Now, in our 15th year of social and racial justice movement work, the gathering has expanded to include our task forces Justice League NYC and Justice League California. Please make sure you're following us on Twitter and Instagram at New York Justice League and at Gather for Justice, number 4, Justice. Radical Reads is one of our most popular programs, inspired by Mr. Belafonte's idea for a sustained radical book club. The Gathering and Justice League members recommended a book every month, along with an analyst of why it was selected as a radical read. Tonight's Radical Reads presentation features our first work of fiction, Sanctuary. It is the most unique story following a young immigrant girl in the future as she battles against the nation's deportation force on her way to sanctuary. The book was co-written by our dear friend and sister, Paola Mendoza, and we're so honored to have her here this evening, and we look forward to hearing a section of the book read aloud a little later. But first, it is a privilege to introduce Alida Garcia, who will be interviewing Paola. Alida is a board member of the Gathering for Justice and was one of the honoraries, along with Mr. Belafonte and the exonerated Central Park 5, the Gathering's 10th anniversary gala at the Apollo 5 years ago. Alida is a strategist and organizer for an electoral and issue advocacy campaigns. She currently is the VP of Advocacy for Forward US, an advocacy organization focused on legalizing undocumented immigrants and ending mass incarceration. Alida is also the founder of Inclusive, a network focused on increasing the number of people of color who build careers in politics and advocacy and transforming the progressive infrastructures, commitment to diversity and inclusion in hiring. Please welcome Alida Garcia.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you all who are joining today's Radical Reads. My name is Alida Garcia. I am so excited to introduce my friend, my sister. I'm already getting emotional and we haven't even started the conversation. Paola Mendoza for today's conversation about her new book, Sanctuary, which I've brought here as a visual aid so that you all go and buy it after you partake in this conversation. We're really excited to be here today for this conversation. You know, we're a week out from Election Day, and the fight for dignity for immigrant families and asylum seekers, and the stakes could not be higher in this moment. And I'm really excited to talk about Sanctuary Book with Paola because it brings so much that's happening in the world into a consumable fiction, but feels very real life to me format. And so we're going to dig into that today. But please join me behind your cameras, welcoming Paola to the conversation. So Paola, I would love to just introduce you to the group before we get into the characters and the book. I am a fangirl and have read 2 out of 3 of your books and seen one of your movies. So I'm very intimately familiar with your storyline, but would love to hear a little bit about your personal history and how that has driven your focus as an artist and a writer that sort of led you to putting the words of Sanctuary on the page.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alida, and thank you to the Gathering for Justice for hosting tonight. When you all reached out, I was deeply honored because I respect the work that you all do so much. So to be in family and with you and to have your support means the world to me. And Alita, tonight's going to be all about crying because that's all we do is cry, on top of the fact that it's 7 days before the election. So I'm really stressed out. And I think we probably all are very stressed out. So I deal with stress by crying. So it's all good. And I am also your fangirl on so many levels. I will say that I've been telling the stories of immigrants for, I don't know, 15 years probably. I myself am an immigrant. My mother is also an immigrant. We came to this country when I was very young, when I was 3 years old. And I came to this country with my brother and my mom, and we came from Colombia. And we were being reunited with my father, who had come a few months earlier. And after a few months after we arrived, my father told my mom that he was going to work and he never came back. And what that means is that he didn't come back because he abandoned us. He left us in this country with no family. With we were the first of our family to immigrate to the United States. He left us. My mom spoke no English. She had high school education. I was 3. My brother was 7. And he left her with like $200 in her pocket. And what my mother was able to do was really make miracles happen every day. The miracle of putting just the food on our table was extraordinary when it happened. There was times when we were homeless, uh, but she was able to eventually find us permanent housing. We were on welfare for some time, and yet through all of that, she was able to get her first job in the United States, which was at a fast food restaurant. And so my mom's story is that she says that she speaks English so bad to this day because she learned English from an Italian woman at the fast food restaurant that really didn't know English. And so I say all of that because, to answer your question, the story of my mother and the women like her have been so critical to the foundation of what I want to tell and the stories I want to tell and the stories I want to explore as an artist. I want to tell the stories of the women like my mother and the women that I grew up with in my community, whose stories I don't see often told in full, complicated, beautiful ways that celebrate them and also allow them to be flawed individuals. So that's been my life's mission for 15 years. And under the Trump administration, that work has become even more critical for me personally.
So Donald Trump gets elected, and you, Carmen, who's going to be reading later today, and a bunch of others, hit the streets, organizing towards the Women's March, which really has roots in the organizing against anti-Blackness and police violence from Justice League in New York following the murder of Eric Gardner. So you hit the streets and you see this swell of women out there to fight. And then it's kind of like, well, what do we do with this? And some of those women needed some education around how to access advocating towards communities of color and understanding the issues that impacted them. And I'm curious from your lens, if any of that experience of being the bridge to folks that may not be in like the policy alphabet soup of immigration law, motivated why you chose a dystopian futuristic YA novel or a young adult novel for those that aren't in that demographic as the vehicle of your expression in Sanctuary.
Absolutely. What we learned in the Women's March, and many of us are here, as you mentioned, Carmen, Sarah, Sophie, Ginny, that worked and founded the Women's March, was that there was a lot of, not even that we learned it, it was just confirmed that there was a lot of work that needed to be done across communities. And that meant, I came into a space where a lot of people didn't have the intimate knowledge that I had with regards to immigration and the policy knowledge that I had with immigration. I am not an immigrant expert, but I have you, Alita, that I can text and ask any question around immigration to, and you will give me that expert opinion and that understanding. So we all had our own expertises that we brought to the table. And that was complicated and painful at times, but also we learned a tremendous amount of things about life and policy and the vision that we wanted to put forth to this country. That being said, I've spent a lot of time teaching people outside the Women's March around immigration, from the basic things of what words we use to describe undocumented immigrants and what words we do not use to describe undocumented immigrants. Right? I've sat in boardrooms with very powerful people and had to correct people in their word language. And just last week, I was talking to middle schoolers, and I had to explain to them why we use the word undocumented and why we don't say the I word. Right? So that to me is part of the work that I choose to do. And as an artist, because I define myself as an artist first and foremost, telling this story in a dystopian, futuristic world in the United States that is only 12 years ahead of where we are and very clearly lays out where we could possibly be if we elect Donald Trump in 2020. And the book is very unapologetic about that statement. It is a way in which to get young readers to see this and to start engaging on immigration early, because I do think if we engage with them when they're 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, how much will they evolve by the time they are in positions of power, right? And I do think that our ideas, I hope our ideas and our understanding of the world evolves, as well as this book is also meant for adults, and it's an intergenerational book is what I say, and what my co-writer Abby Sher says as well. We want older people, however old they are, because in the YA world, I didn't know this before I started working in it, the majority of people that read YA are actually adults. So there's that. So it's an intergenerational book where we can have conversations from older generations and younger generations and really get to a deeper, newer understanding of where this country is on immigration, how central it is, and that we actually have the power to shift the narrative around immigration where we want it to go, rather than be stuck in this horrible narrative that the administration is like shoving down our throats constantly, and how we fight back against it.
Awesome. Well, we're about to be joined right now by some amazing special guests, folks that are important to the journey of the gathering and the journey of Paola and the creation of Sanctuary. So I'm really excited to be joined by Winter Brienne, Chris Arroyo, Andrea Gonzalez, Sarah Sophie Flicker, Ginny Suss, Michael Skolnick, Tammy Lee, Assemblywoman Wendy Carrillo, and Carmen Perez. And that we're about to read chapter 1, but I'd love, Paola, before we dig in, I do want to say, folks, that I read the book over the weekend because I wanted to be prepared for this conversation. It is a thrilling, emotional ride, and a lot goes down in this chapter. And so to the extent that you are a person who identifies as impacted by the immigration system, I do just want to prep you for the content that we are about to engage upon. We'll take some space to breathe afterwards if necessary, and dig into the dialogue around what table has been set in chapter 1 and what that means for our future together with Paola after this conversation. But did want to just give that note before we head into the content. But Paola, before Winter kicks us off, would love for you to just finish this sentence. Sanctuary book is...
a roadmap for all of us to step into our power of freedom fighters, as freedom fighters.
I love that. So with that, Winter, take us away.
Beautiful. So yeah, we're reading Sanctuary, chapter 1, and I'll start. It took 15 years for her to die. 15. One for each year of her life before they snuffed it out. I was supposed to be doing homework. Actually, I was doing homework, but my phone kept buzzing. So I tapped on the notifications and there she was. I never did learn her name. In the reports, they would call her an illegal 15-year-old or a 15-year-old immigrant. It depended on who was talking. The underground reporters would also call her brave, defiant, fearless. And the government news would call her disease-ridden, illegal, criminal. But as I watched it with my own eyes, I saw that she was just a girl my age, wearing a faded Mickey Mouse t-shirt and jean shorts that were rolled over on top but still looked like they might fall off her skinny waist. She had somehow gotten over a line of concrete ballast and the chain link fence stretching across the burnt out field between Tijuana and San Diego. That rusty, mangled barricade that was supposed to keep people on the Tijuana side, it stood there as a scar, a reminder, a warning. Its sole purpose was to say, stay out, you don't belong here.
That girl in the Mickey Mouse shirt had no time for warnings. She had no interest in being intimidated. She looked completely unafraid as she stepped away from the fence, entering the no man's land between Mexico and the United States. The girl was alone, unarmed. Her dark hair was tied back in a bouncy ponytail, and she had a bright red scratch under her left eye. Besides that, her face looked clear, even calm, and she made her way across the dusty strip of scrumland between Tijuana and the wall. Or really, the wall, the great American wall. There was nothing great about it, more like grotesque. It blocked out the sky with 50-foot tall reinforced steel slats and thick metal mesh in between. Every few feet, there were coils and barbed wire strung across, and on top, there was a maze of cables spitting out of electricity. The government had spent gazillions of dollars and called in all the reserves to help build this monstrosity, sealing us off from the rest of the Americas. Stop, where you are, snarled a voice through a speaker by the wall. Technically, that girl wasn't even on the United States soil. But as the president loved to say, America was the greatest nation in the history of greatness, and we needed to do whatever it took to protect our sacred borders. That was why there was a platoon of Border Patrol officers lined up on top of the wall, green zombies, I called them, standing at attention in their olive-colored uniforms with pale, expressionless faces. They had the newest AK-87 strapped to their backs and bloodhounds circling at their feet as they stared down that girl. Because this was their land, because it was their duty to preserve and defend the United States of America, because whatever this 15-year-old intended, walking across in her flip-flops and saggy shorts, she had now become a national threat.
I was so scared and awestruck by that girl's slow, deliberate steps forward. I could even hear myself panting for her as I watched. Mija, what are you doing? Mommy asked me. If you're done with homework, get ready for bed. Wait, you have to see this. No, I don't. Yes, Mommy, you do, my little brother Ernie said, padding in from the bathroom in his PJs. Last I knew, he was watching soccer on his phone, but he must have gotten the same alert as me. Something weird is going on at the wall, he reported. Mommy hated all the notifications and interruptions from our phones, even if we had saved up and paid for them with our own money. But when Ernie came in and made that announcement, Mommy stopped wiping the kitchen counter and marched over to stand behind me at the table. ¿Qué es eso? I can't even see. The screen is too small, she sighed. Mommy loved to tell us how when our family first came to this country, we watched the same show, all together on a single television. Of course, that was before the government took over the broadcasting system, before they censored any newscasters who disagreed or said too much, any movies or shows that seemed unpatriotic. If we wanted to see anything honest or original these days, we had to watch someone's live stream on the dark web, which is what we were doing now. I tapped again to make the live stream into a hologram. The three of us pressed our heads together, watching the image blink in and out because of the poor connection. The camera panned around, showing faces caught between hope and panic. I don't like this, Ernie said. I didn't either, but we couldn't turn away from the screen. We couldn't move. We could only gape at the staticky footage, at that gutsy girl planted each foot down. 1, 2, 3.
There were shouts from the crowd of people in Tijuana gathering behind the barricade. ¿Qué estás haciendo, Cuidado? An air horn blasted. Another green zombie shouted through the speakers. Get back behind the fence, he bellowed. You are not permitted on U.S. soil. We repeat, you are not permitted on U.S. soil. The girl paused, and raised both of her hands in the air to show that she meant no harm. She squinted into the bright West Coast sun with sort of a half grin. Her arms were loose and gawky. I wondered if she was born with this kind of wild bravery or if she had just already lost too much to care. She stepped forward again. Why is she doing that? Whispered Ernie. Why isn't she listening to them? I tried to mumble some sort of response, but my tongue felt too big for my mouth. I flipped to another live stream in Tijuana. They were all filming this girl now. Some from so far away, she looked like a speck creeping across the frame, in between the cement posts. Others zoomed in so close, I swear I could see the hairs in the girl's nose. Yes, we were watching her on screen from thousands of miles away, in the safety of a dusky Vermont evening. But my whole body was trembling for her. I wished I even had a smidge of her courage. There is no trespassing in the demilitarized zone, the zombies ordered again. We repeat, no trespassing in the demilitarized zone.
Dios mío, Mommy said in a low voice, clicking her tongue. She made the sign of the cross, and I swallowed hard. Mommy was as tough as they came, the creases around her eyes holding on to all her worry and pain so that she could always face the world with composure. If she was asking God for help, then this was definitely a moment of truth. Meanwhile, the girl took another step forward, and another. She looked like she was full on smiling now. At least that's how I want to remember her. This is your last warning, roared the zombies. Eres un hero. Ciudadano, yelled the crowd behind her in Tijuana. I could hear people chanting from behind the wall in San Diego. It sounded like they were saying, let her through, let her through. The voices on all sides swelled and lifted her up so she looked like she was floating those last few steps. 11, 12, I was counting in my head. She had just put down her sneaker for the 15th time when the ground exploded underneath her. The sudden flares of orange, yellow, and red slashing through her, blowing her into bits, turning her into dust. Everything shuddered around me, as if that bomb had just detonated inside my gut. I swear I could feel the shockwaves rumbling through the ground from thousands of miles away. The fierce blast of flames was the sharpest color I'd ever known, and the scariest of all, there was no sound. Or really, there was only the absence of sound. Like the whole world had just been punctured, and we had to suck in whatever air was left in one giant gasp, holding it all in for as long as we could. Ernie was the first one to lose it. What happened? Where'd she go? How come we can't see her? He said, panicking. She's, I stammered. I didn't know how to explain what had just happened, to him or to myself. Mommy? Mommy just stood there, watching the screen, as Ernie and I let 1,000 unanswerable questions dribble out of our mouths. We needed to fill all the space between us, to keep talking, because talking was breathing, and breathing was living, and living meant we still existed, even if it was in some crazy effed up world where a 15-year-old girl was blown up because she tried to cross the border.
Mommy, did you see what happened? I begged. When I couldn't take Mommy's silence anymore, I grabbed her warm wrist and squeezed. Sí, claro que sí, Mommy murmured. Seeing Mommy this disturbed only made it all more horrible, more real. She exhaled slowly, the air whistling through her teeth. Then she squeezed her eyes shut, like she was trying to erase what she had just seen on my screen. It's a landmine, mija, like in Colombia. What? I shouted, as if my anger could change what had just occurred, although maybe it did because the picture of the girl in the flames went dark, the connection severed. I flipped to a different live stream again. The first one I found was from someone standing on the San Diego side of the wall. I heard people wailing and shouting, "They killed her! They killed her!" Then I saw a mad rush of bodies pushing and shoving their way toward the wall, hurling themselves to the steel slats, scraping and kicking at the mesh in between. A stampede of green zombies charged into the fray. It looked like there was just as many of them on the ground in San Diego as there were on top of the wall, maybe more. Now they were unleashing their bloodhounds on the American side, the canines grunting and snapping. There's a blast of white. Whoever was filming our live stream started shaking and running, shouting, "Cover your mouths! Run!"
It sounded like the Border Patrol officers on the American side were now launching tear gas canisters at the scrambling crowd in San Diego. Dios mío, Mommy gasped again. There were bodies writhing and twisting on the ground. They clawed at each other, desperate for pockets of fresh air. Then there was a thud. All we could see on my phone was the dusty ground, a flood of sneakers, flip-flops, and bare feet running by. No, I pleaded. I wanted to reach through the hologram and save whoever had just gone down, but I had to find another feed to see what was happening. I scrolled through image after image. The crowds on both sides of the wall were multiplying by the second now, surging with rage and heartache, shouting into their screens or at the Border Patrol helicopters swooping in and circling overhead. In Tijuana, there were people scaling the chain link fence, tripping over themselves as they charged towards the bits of that broken girl. Era una niña, they wailed. Mothers clutched their children, tears coursing down their cheeks. In San Diego, there were people banging rocks on the great grotesque wall, pounding and hammering at the ballast like a growing thunder. No more walls, no more deaths, they yelled. There were thousands of hands grabbing, scratching, trying to rip apart the steel, the barbed wire, the hatred that went into building the wall. The green helicopters hovered over them like a venomous cloud.
What are the helicopters for? Are they gonna hurt more people? Ernie asked in a tiny voice. I don't think so. No, they cannot, Mommy said, reaching for my phone, maybe to shut it off and protect us from seeing anymore. Only as she did, a new and horrifying sound belted out from my screen. Tut-tut-tut-tut-tut-tut. The helicopters were shooting into the crowds on both sides. No, I screamed. Dios mío santísimo. The shrieks and moans were piling on top of each other. It didn't matter which language they spoke. They were all crying. Help! Ernie buried his head into Mommy's chest. Wait, what if Tia Luna's there? I sputtered. Mommy lunged at the kitchen counter to get her phone. Todo va a estar bien, tranquilos, was all she said as she dialed her sister's number. Call Tia Luna, I screamed at my phone. It couldn't recognize my voice when I was this frantic and screechy though. So I tried to press in her number, my fingers jerking and stuttering from key to key. A stale recording came on the other end of the phone. Your request cannot be processed at this time. Please hang up and try again. Mommy was pacing across the linoleum, hanging up and trying again, hanging up and trying again.
Do you think she's there? I asked. She wouldn't go there, would she? No creo, Mommy said, her face a knot of pain and anger. She put down her phone for a brief moment and clasped her hands together in front of our kitchen window, as if the sky could tell her something else. I don't get it, Ernie whimpered. What's going on? There were so many shots coming from my screen now. I couldn't count them anymore. I couldn't do anything. The gap between us and whatever was going on at the border widening like a giant hole, dividing us into here and there, before and after. We know nothing, Mommy told us. We don't know if Tia Luna is there or if. And then it was all cut off. Our phones went dark. There was no sound, no image, no connection to whatever was unraveling on the other side of the country. just a blank screen. We held our breath and waited, pinched with fear. And then, a few minutes later, a new haunting image flickered on. I'd never seen anything like this being broadcast before. It was a large desk in the middle of a bare room. There were stark gray cinder block walls behind it, interrupted by a portrait of the president and an empty wooden chair. I flipped to another feed and another, but they were all showing the same thing, the same desk, the same wall, the same portrait, as if to wipe away everything that had just happened, as if to wipe us all away. End of chapter 1.
Okay. I'm pretty emotional. I'm wondering if others are as well. I'm feeling stress in my stomach if I bring in my mindfulness practices into this moment. Would love to just, I see Assembly Member Carrillo tearing up. So would love to just take a collective breath together for those of you that are watching on Facebook. So if you inhale with me and exhale. Okay, team. So that is chapter 1 of Sanctuary. And I thought what would be fitting to get us started is to honor the little girl in the Mickey Mouse shirt, who, when you get the book, you'll find sparked a revolution. And people rose up and created a space of sanctuary in the state of California. And I'm not going to tell all of the things that happen in the book because you have to read it, but I do want you to have some hope from what came from that little girl. And I wanted to actually take a moment to lift up 7 young people who do have names, who I'd like to bring into this space. Marie Juarez, who was 1 year old. Jacqueline Calmaquin, who was 7 years old. Carlos Gregorio Hernandez Vasquez, who was 16 years old. Felipe Gomez Alonso, 8 years old. Juan de Leon Gutierrez, 16 years old. Wilmer Josue Ramirez Vasquez, 2 years old. Darlene Cristabel Cordova Valle, 10 years old. If you can unmute yourself, if you're a panelist, and on the count of 3, just shout presente into your microphones. Would love to bring their names into this space. So 1, 2, 3.
Presente.
Presente.
Thank you for indulging with me on that. Those 7 young people have died. They've been killed, whether that be from the detention centers themselves or from illness that they received in the horrific conditions, incarcerated as tiny babies at our border over the last 4 years in this administration. And so wanted to bring them into this conversation because as much of this being a futuristic novel to help us sort of see where this could go, these tragedies are happening on a daily basis. But when I read chapter 1 and saw the little girl in the Mickey Mouse shirt taking those steps and challenging the green monsters, I saw the women and children of the caravan before the 2018 election. And I know that you traveled with them and met a lot of mothers and a lot of children who took that journey. And so I was just wondering if you can talk about how any of that experience helped bring you into your choices around who the characters were in Sanctuary.
Absolutely. Alita, thank you for calling in all of those beautiful children who are no longer with us. You know, this book is written from a place of realness, of reality. I have, for good and for bad, I have been able to tell the stories of tremendous, incredibly brave people who have tried to come into this country, who are in this country
asking for asylum, who have been living in this country for decades at times, undocumented. And so all of their stories live in this book. Not one character is based on anyone that I've met, whether it was someone on the caravan, whether it was families who had been separated, whether it was our undocumented brothers and sisters in this country, but everyone that I've spoken to, and at this point it's probably thousands of people, live in this book. And I tried with this book, along with Abby Sher, to really honor the privilege of hearing their stories, and also because it is based on reality. And Alita, you made this connection so brilliantly. I teased out reality to something futuristic that was only 12 years from now. So you're 100% correct. We have so much death of children at our border who have come into custody. And also, unfortunately, you know, right now we have refugee camps on our southern border because the Trump administration started a horrible policy, MPP, and now he's closed down the border and basically ended asylum as we know it completely. So who knows who has perished at those refugee camps. So the opening chapter, as difficult as it is where my imagination allowed me to move forward based off of where we currently are at this moment in time. So it seems absolutely insane that the United States would put landmines on its southern border to keep out Black and brown immigrants. But given where we are and all that has transpired in 4 years, it's actually not that unbelievable to me. And I know people will be like, oh, you're so dramatic. That will never happen. That's impossible. But I could go through a litany of things that we thought was absolutely not possible in 2016, at least I should say. I couldn't imagine the evilness of Stephen Miller and Trump. I couldn't imagine, knowing that they were bad, I couldn't imagine it would have been this bad. So now I force myself with this book to imagine the worst, and I believe that we could eventually get there. So all that to say is that yes, the caravan is very present in the book. I spent a lot of time with the caravan. I saw the beauty and the strength and the inspiration of the caravan. I also saw the pain. I also saw the injustice. And I also saw, I often say, the characteristics of the people on the caravan were strength, inspiration, grit. Like if I could tell you the stories of the people that I met, it's like, you want all of these people in this country. These are qualities that are extraordinary qualities that should be celebrated and not demonized.
It's so important. So the family that was watching this happen on TV in Vermont, at near dairy farms in Vermont, can you tell our audience a little bit about them, and maybe not give the whole story away, but who is Vali, and how, tell me about that family and sort of like the journey that is sparked following this scene.
Absolutely. They are a mixed status family. So that means that Ernie, the 8-year-old, is an American citizen, and the mother and Valley, who's 16, are undocumented. And in this futuristic world in the United States, everybody is chipped on their wrist. And if you are undocumented, you don't get a chip. And so that's how the government is able to know you can't function without a chip, because you have to scan into everything, to school, to markets, to the bus, to the library, to every office building, you scan in with your chip. So if you don't have a chip, you can't function. And so Valley has a chip that's a fake chip. And so does Valley's mom. She has a fake chip, but it malfunctions. And so because of the uprising in California, there's a revolution, as you said. The federal government locks down and throws out some huge deportation force to round up all of the undocumented immigrants. And so Valley and her mom and her brother are forced to go from Vermont to California because California secedes from the Union. And this all happens within 30, 40 pages. So I'm actually not giving away a lot, but they secede from the Union, and thus begins the family's journey from Vermont to California. And you know, it very much parallels the journey of so many families that go from south to north, that go from our countries to the United States for safety, for refuge. And in this book, It's very clear and on purpose and for design that we're going from east to west. And that's because migration has been happening since the beginning of time. And we are currently in a moment where we're going from south to north. But a few centuries ago, you know, they were going from Europe to Africa, going down. But we just called it something different then, right? So we called it, quote unquote, exploring the world, when in reality they were pillaging the world. But that's another conversation for another day.
One of the things that struck me as an immigration advocate was the scene when the family takes off on their journey, and the mother hides little pieces of paper of the address of where she hoped they would all end up together, but in case she didn't make it with her kids, she was preparing them to have an address to go. And I think about the tens of thousands of mothers that are in Mexico right now, trapped in the Remain in Mexico program, who are sleeping in tents on the streets in Mexico, subject to kidnapping and rape and extortion, and are in this very moment today in the United States so fearful for their own lives and their ability to protect their children that they're sending their children ahead and separating themselves from them, not knowing if they'll ever see them again, and writing phone numbers on their arm or sticking addresses in their shoes, and just hoping that once those kids present themselves at the border, that the United States will get them to a cousin or the you know, that's in the United States. And so it felt very present for me when I read that scene. And you know, I'm a new mom, and you're I wouldn't say a veteran, but you have quite more motherhood years than me. In something that I think about often as a mom is just like how much you're planning ahead on everything. And so here comes the tears, but how much you can't control. And so was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the strength of motherhood as a through line, and you know, how that is expressed with Vali and Ernie as well throughout the book, but how the state can be so violent towards the very human nature of motherhood, and how that's impacted you, experiencing family separation close up, and also in writing this book.
Absolutely. I will say that because you're a mother of twins, I think that gives you more veteran experience than me. But we'll debate that another day in person one day over drinks when we get out of this pandemic. Tequila, mezcal, actually mezcal. You like mezcal. Okay, so yes. As an artist, as a storyteller, I like to tell stories of mothers and their children. It's a very easy understanding as to why, right? My mom is the central person in my life, and I owe so much. I am because of my mother. Like, that is very simple to me. And so I think I know as an immigrant, as a child of an immigrant, actually, I carry a lot of guilt of making sure that like all that my mother's sacrifices, that I live up to my mother's sacrifices, and I'm constantly trying to prove to myself I can do all these things. Like, it was worth it for her. She sacrificed so much for me to be able to do this, so I must do this. And so I think that's also part of the reason why I'm attracted to telling stories of mothers and children. I'm a mother of a young boy. He's the love of my life, obviously, and I fiercely protect him. And it's also that love that I have for him that I also can expand my heart and have love for all these kids. And it infuriates me, it breaks my heart, and it is also my motivator as to the work that I do, which is the work that we do, to try to just simply allow these kids to have the opportunities, the basic opportunities that our children have, that my child has. You know, this moment that you brought up in the book, Alita, I think it's really amazing. And of course, no one else has brought it up, but you are so aware and so in tune with everything that it was really inspired by the little girl who, at the height of family separation, the recording of the little girl at the height of family separation, we heard her crying on the audio, which was horrible and heartbreaking, but also what many people didn't hear, if you weren't able to listen to the crying, was that she's giving her telephone number of her aunt. It is that one thing that mother could do in that moment to make sure that her child got towards some safety. And I feel that that's universal across the board. All mothers would do that. And it is in those moments in this book that I try really hard to make those parallels and make people understand that if you were in this circumstance, you would do the same. And hopefully people will make the connection. If you were in the circumstance where folks are currently today, you would do the same. That if you were in these refugee camps on the southern border, God forbid, and you were forced to choose between keeping your child in the refugee camp that, as you mentioned, is violent and scary, and COVID could possibly enter that refugee camp at any moment, or send them on their way by themselves, and you possibly would never see them again. It's the hardest decision that any parent would have to make, and I hope that no parent would ever have to make it. But the reality is that there's hundreds, if not thousands, of people making it every day, and we have to be aware of that. And so part of this story, this idea, this book, is to allow us to see what we're responsible for in this country. And then also, and this is really important, I know this book sounds really sad and hard, and it is hard to read, but there is a way forward. There is a way out. And that is Valley. That is a 16-year-old girl who is undocumented. And I said at the beginning with Alita's amazing question, what is this book? Sanctuary is a blueprint for how to become a freedom fighter, because ultimately that is what Valley becomes. And I think that we can all become Valley, and we all need to become Valley. So that's also what the book is about.
Let's talk about like ordinary heroes that show up in this book. There's so many like courageous small acts that emerge in this book that are in the moment, and just like the concept of community and courage and togetherness that is what really propels people into safety in moments. Would love for you to talk a little bit about Sister Lottie, who I adored, and she felt very familiar to me. I've met some Sister Lotties in my life, and so would love for you to introduce our audience to Sister Lottie and the vibrancy of the tiny little community that she built around her.
Absolutely. Sister Lottie is a Catholic nun who runs a church in Jackson Heights, Queens, in New York. Jackson Heights is a community that I love very much. I've made 2 movies out there. The Colombian community, I'm Colombian, so I go out there often. When Mateo, my son, wants rice and beans, I go out to Jackson Heights because I don't cook them very well, sadly. Though I have gotten better in the pandemic. So Sister Lottie has this church, and what this church that she's created is a place where immigrants that are being persecuted can come and find safety and refuge. And she is a regular person. And I think that that's really important, Alita, that you said that a regular hero, and Valley herself is a regular girl. She's not a girl that's extraordinary at math. She's not a superstar at soccer. She's not an incredible singer. There is nothing extraordinary about her. From the outside, she's just a regular girl, and yet when she's put into a position, she rises to the occasion. And so many people in our book do that, and it's intentional, because I believe that we will save ourselves not by extraordinary heroes, but rather everyday individuals that become heroes, that do heroic things. And that's really, really important. I talk about this with my son all the time. be an upstander, say something. We hear that, what does it mean to be, whether we call it an ally or an accomplice? We've seen moments in time, especially in the past few years, what it looks like and what it doesn't look like. And again, so this book tries to point it out in a way that young people will want to identify with those upstanders in this book, as my son's elementary school calls them. And also, there's a lot of moments in the book, and they're not main characters in the book, but where you see people doing the opposite, and how in those moments where they are not either they're bystanders, they watch something happen, they're not upstanders, how it changes the course of the story. If they would have done something in the moment, how that might have helped our protagonists. And that's important too, for people to be able to reflect on and see, because I do think that we as individuals can make and should make changes, large structural changes, but also personal individual changes.
One of the things that I thought was interesting in the book was well, I will say that I took this personally. I felt like there was a critique of organizers in this book.
And, I wondered what organizers were going to say about this.
And because we're with the Gathering and with Justice League, who I believe are some of the more cutting edge of like the combining of cultural campaigns and art infused with organized advocacy towards goals against the state, in great part due to Mr. Belafonte's legacy. Would love to just hear like what was motivating some of that. You're an artist who has been able to insert herself into some of like the super wonky places of organizing, and what are some of the lessons that I don't consider you an outsider, but perhaps like your superpower is a little bit outside of like the usual tactics of grassroots community organizers. What is a little bit of that bridge that you think that you brought into that book, where there's a scene where Valley just feels like Valley's gone through some traumatic events and starts to interact with folks who are organizing, and there's a bit of a disconnect that she's experiencing as an impacted person interfacing with those who really mean well, but perhaps aren't totally fired up in the right way to fight back. And I'm just curious if any of your personal experiences motivated some of that perception.
Yeah. Again, so insightful. So you're so brilliant. So it wasn't, that moment in the book is not necessarily a critique towards my activist and organizer friends, of which I have many, but rather more so a self-reflection. I have been in places and spaces where I feel that I am more disconnected to what is going on the ground. The work, the concepts, the ideas that we're talking about are not connected to the urgency that's on the ground. And so really it's a self-reflection of my own personal role, and talking about it obviously generally as well to the larger idea of activism. So, and then also just talking to people sometimes, I think, that are going through the trauma. A perfect example, this is an extreme example because we live under the Trump administration, but it was actually one of the moms, Alita, you and I were helping during the height of family separation. And it was, as you know, it was very painful and it was very long and very slow. And this mom had been separated from her child, who I believe was 5 years old, to the age of my son, for a long time, for about a month. And we would talk all the time. And one time she called me and I was in an organizing meeting. I was with Jess, I was with National Domestic Workers Alliance. We were organizing something like in the meeting, and I saw that she called, so I stepped out of the meeting, and she was bawling on the phone, and rarely did she lose her self-control. She was bawling, almost unable to speak. And I just asked her, "Are you okay? What's going on?" And when she was finally able to say the words, she said to me that her son She had just had her weekly conversation with her son, and her son, for the first time since they've been separated, was crying on the phone, begging her to bring him home for them to be reunited. And she couldn't keep it together. And so that moment in the book is that frustration, right? That like there is this woman whose life is literally breaking and on the line, and we're in an office talking about how to help her, but ultimately talking about like very grandiose big ideas that we believe will help her. But it just is kind of like this. And I don't think that anyone is doing anything wrong. It is just the circumstances of the moment. And it's something that I grapple with often.
Same. It's like, how do you help the person that's in front of you, and how do you do systems change? And when you're brought into both of those things, you can feel very stretched. And I think Justice League, engages on that front as, the work that you all are doing with the Monterosa sisters around very specific demands around a very specific family in case of police violence, while also advocating for changes of law at the New York City level and statewide level. It's just a lot to hold and to understand the urgency of the person in front of you. Does that supersede the getting of the thing done so that less people experience what that person in front of you is experiencing, and really feeling pulled around where your own personal capacity can be leveraged most effectively over time? That resonates with me very greatly. Okay, we're coming up closer to the end of the hour. I kind of felt like at the end of the book, either this was going to be a movie or there was going to be a second book. So I'm curious, we're in this critical moment in the United States history where a lot is on the line over the next 7 days, and today, people are voting today. As Michael, who is on the call with us, tweets every day, election day is today, team, today. And I personally have not, here come the tears again. I have not allowed myself to think about what a world of more possibility could look like a week from now. I've been working on planning what getting those 20,000 people off the streets could look like, but with a very head down, don't want to feel what that could feel like perspective. So I'm curious, what would you want your readers of this book to bring into the now? Let's call it 8 days from now, if we can be visionary for what that feels like. Would love to bring Vali into next week. And what would she want us to do?
First, I want to say, Alita, you are so extraordinary, because I have done the opposite. I have not allowed myself to imagine what not winning will look like, because I just possibly cannot. I am only dealing with the hope and the possibility and the love, because the other reality is too painful and too dark for me. So I commend your strength and thank you for doing that work, because I know it is not easy. What I want for 8 days from now, for the visionary, for the to bring Valley into the next 8 days, which I love that. Throughout the book, and this is getting very technical, but throughout the book, there are philosophies around organizing in the book. And I don't know if people will ever be able to get that, but for me, when we were writing it, I was like, okay, I want to work this theory into the book, and we'll do it via this character and this action and how they respond. So it's in there very, very deep. But the last, and the one that I talk about and that I will quote unquote reveal, which is pretty obvious, but nonetheless, oh shit, I don't want to give away the ending, so I'm trying to think how to say this. Well, the principle is one that we hear often, and it is that our liberation is bound in the freedom of others, right? Our freedom is bound in the freedom of others. And And that, I think, is really important for November 4th, if we're able to have the results on November 4th, which I'm not sure that we will, but that we are doing work under what I hope and believe is a Biden administration that is going to be super difficult as well for immigration advocates and activists, but we are able to really push that idea to the powers that be, to those that are in power, that our freedom is bound to the freedom of those people that are at our southern border in refugee camps, to the children that are in immigration jails right now with their families, to the fathers and men that are trapped in detention centers that are having COVID outbreaks. All of these very specific, real dynamics that are happening within our immigration rights movement, immigration experience in this country, that we can't be free until they ultimately are as well. So that's what I would want to bring into November 4th and beyond. How about you, Alita?
I loved that she still had fight in her at the end, because I'm feeling a little depleted. And I liked that a lot. And I think that it's like, no matter what is in front of us, we always have to find the space to have a fight and to show up for one another. And, you know, building off of that and the role of the Gathering and Justice League, which I think is one of the organizations that really is trying to find Black and Brown solidarity around how the state criminalizes Black, Indigenous, and folks of color. You know, I heard the voices of Black migrants in Sanctuary, in the Creole being whispered in different places through, I believe there was like a Jamaican immigrant at Sister Lottie's. It felt like you were trying to bring in more of the world beyond the Latino experience.
Latino man is Brazilian.
Yeah, and so would love to hear your thoughts on how immigrant rights activists can be better and stronger in showing up for Black people. What motivated you to make sure that you were bringing Black people into your immigration story?
I'll start with the second question first, and that is really because so much of the work that you and I had the honor to do together at Forward so long ago is that we were very aware of making sure that that narrative was part of our immigration narrative. That Black folks are 100% immigrants as well. There are, I should say, Black immigrants coming into the United States. They are undocumented immigrants and there are documented immigrants. We have Black doctors that also are, have DACA and not. So that story is critical because what we have not been able to experience in this country is to be able to hear and be told and be part of the entire story, right? And representation matters in history, representation matters in art, representation matters in advocacy, and it matters in political office and spaces. And so I'm very much aware of, if I'm writing from a space of representation, of seeing a lack of specific stories, and which is one of the reasons why we wrote Sanctuary, well, why I had the idea of Sanctuary, is because at that time when we started writing the book a few years ago, there wasn't adult young YA books that had undocumented immigrants at the center of their stories. There was a handful, a handful is not enough, knowing that there are 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country. That's just not enough. And so because of the lack of representation, I decided to write this book. And in my writing of the book, I have to make sure that I am not guilty of perpetuating the same problem. And that was a very intentional, clear choice, right? We have Black immigrants, and our group of leads are all immigrants from different parts of the country, or of the world, sorry. We have 2 Latinos, we have an Asian immigrant, and then we have a Brazilian immigrant who in my mind has always been an Afro-Brazilian immigrant. And so it's just kind of experiencing the whole gamut of what immigration means in this moment in time. Sorry, there is a very loud helicopter outside of my house. I don't know if you all can hear it.
No, I don't hear it.
Oh, wow, it's very loud.
Well, thank you for that, because I think that that is a call to action for the opportunity. Knock on whatever's around you, crossing the fingers, say your whatever that lies ahead. I've really enjoyed this conversation with you. I miss you.
I miss you
I could have
too.
hugged you after I read the book. I saw a lot of us in this. This is so embarrassing that this is going to be on the internet. But any closing remarks? I have some to share on behalf of Justice League, but anything else that you'd like to close us out with?
I just want to say that I love you and you are 100% in this book. I don't know if you read the thank yous, but I very much thought of you and all the extraordinary women that I have been organizing with for a very long time over the years that, as I said in the book, Valley, our lead character, is forged from the fire of you incredible women. So I was worried about you reading the book, which is why I sent you the email. And I will tell everybody that's listening, I was like, Alita, this book is really going to be hard for you. So you don't have to read it. Like, I'll feed you questions. You don't have to put yourself through this pain. So as always, Alita, you go above and beyond. You are truly one of the greats. I love you. And to anyone that wants to purchase this book, I have to always pitch this, but you can buy it at any bookstore, bookshop.com. If you want to see more stories of diverse characters, then we must support artists that are diverse. So, and to your question, Alita, about a book or a movie, or I'm sorry, a second book or a movie, I am in process of hopefully making this into a movie. It's a long process, so we'll see. But for a second book, the first book needs to do well. So there are definitely plans for a second book. And oh, does Valley do extraordinary things in the second book, but we need the first book to do well. So thank you again. Thank you to the Justice League, to Carmen, to Jules. You all are extraordinary, and I learn every day from all of you. Thank you.
I love that. We'll buy the book. It looks like this. It's very exciting. My local bookstore did not have it, but I wanted to buy from an independent bookstore, so I made them order it for me. They had it 3 days later and went down and picked it up. And so on behalf of the board and the staff of the Gathering of Justice, I just want to thank you all for joining us this evening. In the coming weeks, please keep up to speed with everything Justice League has going on. We'll be presenting a critical town hall conversations on police reform on prison reform and leading direct action mobilizations in support of justice for Jakey and Sean Monterosa, continuing our work building the community in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, and presenting the next Revolutionary Reels film. And tomorrow evening, October 28th, the Gathering will be presenting the next program in Our Voice, Our Power series. It'll be Our Voice, Our Power, GOTV Amidst Voter Suppression, and it's a youth forum. The virtual town hall will feature youth leaders from across the country discussing the importance of youth turnout in the 2020 elections. If you liked watching me cry on the internet, but do love the Gatherings programming, which I do, which I'll be doing after this, and would like to help them during this critical time, please consider a donation of any size at Cash App, #Gathering the number 4 Justice, or on the website, gatheringforjustice.org/donate. And please stay in touch. Just text freedom, the number 1. So freedom 1, that's freedom and the number 1, no spaces, to 72345. So again, freedom 1 to 72345. And then follow the link to sign up for our mailing list to stay connected. And please also make sure that you're following us on Twitter and Instagram at NY Justice League and Gather for Justice. So thank you all for your time. And if you have not voted and you have the rights to vote in the United States, we do hope you consider to exercise that right over the next few days. Have a good night.